Hi guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be discussing quasi public goods. Now, in the previous video, we discussed about pure public goods, but this video is about quasi public goods, which are also sometimes known as impure public goods, simply quasi public. Now, the thing is that what quasi public goods are, firstly, let's recall that public goods are simply non-excludable and non-rivalrous, right? And we already know what they are, what non-rivalrous, non-excludable means. But you see some goods that may appear to be public goods, they do not fully meet both the characteristics of non-excludability and non-rivalrous in full. And for this reason, they're called quasi-public goods because they do not fit neatly into the criteria of pure public goods. So they're sort of, let's say, somewhere in the middle, right? They're not fully private either, neither they're fully public goods, right? For example, let's say public museums that would charge an entrance fee. Now we know that if public museum is charging an entrance fee, then it's excludable. But if the museum gets crowded, it becomes rivalrous after a certain point, but it's not rivalrous from the beginning. Just like private goods are. Private goods are rivalrous from the beginning. Only after a certain point it becomes rivalrous. So public museums charging an entrance fee won't necessarily be a private good because, it's not rivalrous from the start. It only becomes rivalrous after a certain point. Similarly, public parks, anything that has to do with space involved, it's constrained by the physical space. So even public parks that would charge an entrance fee, so public beaches that would charge an entrance fee, so public swimming pools that would charge an entrance fees, right? So there's an entrance fees which makes it excludable, but then they aren't rivalrous from the start. So only when they're crowded or something they become rivalrous. So yes, they are excludable because you can charge a fee, but initially they are non-rivalrous, and only after being crowded they become rivalrous, right guys? So these are examples of public goods. Also, for instance, now let's talk about toll roads. Toll roads is another example, right? So if you're charging a toll on the road, right? So now, for instance, roads without toll, right? So if you have a toll free road, right? If you have a toll free road, now toll free road is excludable. Sorry, toll free road is non-excludable, right? It's non-excludable. I mean, anyone could use that road, so it's non-excludable. But is a toll free road completely 100% non-rivalrous? No, because after a certain point, when it becomes crowded because of traffic congestion, it becomes rival, right? So it's not purely public goods either, neither it's purely private goods. So toll-free road is another example of quasi-public. Similarly, toll roads is also an example of quasi-public, because you see, in toll roads, you're charging a toll, so it makes it excludable because not everyone would go on that motorway or road because you need to pay a toll for it, and that makes it excludable. But then, although it's excludable, but it's not rivalrous from the start. Only when the road becomes congested, because if more cars on the road and traffic, would that become rivalrous. So it's obviously the road is initially non-rivalrous. So again, it has some of the characteristics of public goods, being that it's non-rivalrous, but only up to a certain point, because after that point it becomes rival, right? So again, toll road is another example of quasi-public, and similarly you're calling it excludable because you're charging a price. So it's not fully pure private goods, neither is fully pure public goods either. So it's quasi-public. So all these are, the thing is that all these that I mentioned right now, especially these what I've written, are sort of excludable because consumers have to pay to consume its services and gain utility out of it. But at the same time, they're also non-rivalrous, right? So although they're excludable, yes, they are excludable, but they're non-rivalrous as well. Like public parks are non-rivalrous, but only up to a certain point. After that, they become rivalrous, right? So it's also non-rivalrous since the use by one doesn't really reduces the availability for others, but they're only non-rivalrous up to a certain point, because after congestion and traffic and being overcrowded, especially if you're talking about beaches, right? So after being overcrowded, the beach becomes rivalrous, right? And this was an example of toll road that I was giving. But even if we talk about a toll-free road, even that is a quasi-public, Because you see, a toll-free road is although non-excludable, but then it's rival as well, but only after a certain point. But then it is rival after a certain point, right? So it's neither a pure public good, neither a pure private good. So although you're calling it a rival, but then you could say, okay, you know what, rival is a characteristic of private good, and but then again, it's only rival after a certain point when traffic congestion happens. But then it's also non-excludable, right? Which is again a feature of public good. But then that's why we're calling these quasi-public goods, right? Same goes for a public beach, right? Without any entrance fee. So it's not necessarily that you only the quasi-public goods have to have, it's not necessary that quasi-public goods are those goods that charge entrance fees or tolls, because it's not necessary that quasi-public goods have to be excludable and rival after a certain point, right? Or you can say that private quasi-public goods are those goods which are, they're excludable, but then they're non-rivalrous and they become rival after a certain point. It's not necessary. I mean, they could be non-excludable as well. Even a toll-free road or a public park or that doesn't really charges an entrance fees, or a beach that doesn't charge an entrance fees. So anything that is non-excludable, I mean, certain goods are, sorry, not anything, but certain goods that are non-excludable, more of things that have to do with, public places, right? That could also be limited by physical space, because after a certain point that would make it rival. So even a toll-free road, though non-excludable, would be rival after a certain point, and same goes for a public beach, right? It doesn't charge an entrance fee, so it's non-excludable, which is a feature of public goods. But then again, it's rival as well, which is again a feature of private goods. But then it's rival after a certain point when the beach becomes more and more crowded, right, guys? So the beach is non-excludable, but although it's non-excludable, the beach is non-excludable, but then it's not non-rival, because it does becomes rival after a certain point. Therefore, we can't really call beach, even though it's not charging anything. So we really can't call the beach a pure public good. So it's quasi-public because it's becoming rival at a certain point, right? Another, uncrowded toll roads is another example of quasi-public. So yes, why uncrowded toll roads? Because it's a toll road, so it makes it excludable. But then the thing is that even though it's uncrowded, okay, fine, it's uncrowded, but it will become crowded after a certain point. But then the thing is that, toll road is sort of excludable, but the fact that it's uncrowded makes it non-rival. So you really don't really have complete excludability and rivalry. Neither you have complete non-excludability and non-rivalry. So it's neither pure public goods, neither pure private goods, right? So that's why we call such goods as quasi-public. So quasi-public goods, guys, could be excludable and non-rival. It could be non-excludable and rival as well. But then, especially when we talk about, I want you to pay close attention here, especially when we call, because this was a past paper question that, sort of tested in the recent attempts as well. Especially when you're talking about quasi-public goods that are sort of excludable. I mean, there is a case that you can exclude them, right? So let's say a public park charges an entrance fee, or a beach charging an entrance fee. So let's say a toll road simply. So the thing is that when quasi-public goods are excludable only for such goods, right? The thing is that the price system, and I want you to hear this out very carefully, that the price system can be made to work here, because that excludes potential users, right? So we can say that a case could be made. Now hear this out very carefully, because this is something that you will need to write in evaluation. That while public goods are provided by the government because they're not provided by the private sector, but then quasi-public goods, especially when you're talking about those quasi-public goods where excludability does exist, so a case could be made that such goods could be provided by the private sector. So the thing is that some of these quasi-public goods, especially let's say public parks, or even when they're charging entrance fees or something, they do have large positive externalities involved, right? Positive spillover effects. So that would justify, government provision as well. So even though we can say that a case could be made that they could be provided by the private sector, but still the fact that, they could have public parks or public beaches or public museums could have large positive externalities, hence it sort of justifies direct government provision as well. Okay guys, so that's quasi-public goods for you. If you like this video, then follow my channel and share it with your friends so that they may also benefit. And I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, take care.